All right, my clock shows that it is the top of the hour. So again, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Kylie Moody, and I work in the executive office at NACADA. And we are happy to celebrate Global Advising a Week, which is celebrated on or around May 2nd, as that is the official date when the Articles of Incorporation were signed, creating NACADA. So to all of you who work with students or all of the work you do, thank you so much. We appreciate you and we are grateful for all of the work that you do. I'm going to hand it over to Bernadette Lewis with Sophia Learning, who is going to talk a little bit about their organization. Sophia Learning has graciously sponsored all of the events this week during Global Advising Week. So Bernadette, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kylie. My name is Bernadette Lewis. I am the brand strategy manager over at Sophia Learning, and just wanted to take some time to say how much fun it has been to follow along with Global Advising Week and to thank the NACADA team for all that they do to support continuing the education and professional development of our advising partners, as well as thank all of you advisors for all of the work that y'all do every day to support and empower student success. Sophia Learning is an online learning platform that has over 70 courses that students can take. They're all self-paced, on demand, async. All learning materials are wrapped up into our platform, and students can go ahead and take those courses and then transfer them into their degree programs. So again, thank you so much for letting us join Global Advising Week. And with that, I will hand it over to Jeanette.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Advising Week and happy Feel Good Friday. I'm Janet Schulenberg. I'm a senior director in the Division of Undergraduate Studies at Penn State University, and I had the honor to chair a task force on creating a definition and scope of practice statement for academic advising for the association. So today I'd like to talk with you a bit about why this matters, why now, why this was important. Talk to you a little bit about how we came to the definition that we offered to the board of directors, and talk you through the definition and scope of practice, and then hopefully have a little bit of room for some conversation about how you can be supported better in meeting that definition and responsibilities of advising. So with that, I'd like to start with why any of this matters in the first place. So, why is a definition of academic advising needed? I will say, when I started out on this work, I met up with Linda Higginson, one of my old mentors, who served on a task force in the early 2000s that led to the scope of the concept of academic advising. She said, "We already did that, but we're in a different place now," and that's what I said to her. So here's why we're in a different place. These next couple of statements. So first, academic advising overlaps with many other areas of the institution, and we work across boundaries with people who also work across boundaries. So we are needing a definition because we have a distinctive identity that has emerged for academic advising, and we need a way to be able to articulate that so that others understand, especially higher education leaders, what it is that we're doing, why it matters to our students and to our institutions. So that identity is important. It also, having an identity will help us have a more consistency in our practice. We all know that when students experience academic advising, it can be really different for each of those students. So having a more consistent experience across our student population will help them better understand what it is to blame us for and what not to, right? What to complain about legitimately and what is not within our scope of responsibility to them, and where we have made a difference. So that leads us to be able to say things about our effectiveness. If we can put bounds around what it is we're supposed to be doing and why, we're in a better position to be able to say, this was an effective way to do that. We reached our goals or we didn't. This will also help us build up our reputation, right? That some of the students and blame us for things that are not ours, or experience something inconsistently and, are unhappy about it. Anyway, improving our reputation will help us build our ability to influence higher education in ways that understand the distinctive knowledge that academic advising creates. That influence is also an important part of having recognition for the work that we do, for differentiating our work from other kinds of work that are also in line with student success. And that differentiation is important for things that matter fundamentally, like our compensation, how we're protected at our institutions. All right, so all of these things are related to having a clear identity. I'll say also on this differentiation in particular, we work in these boundary crossing areas, right? We know when to refer students to somewhere, and how to get them there. But we are also given lots of responsibilities that maybe are not central to academic advising, right? And that starts to blur those lines. There's some scope creep happening within our jobs. And also, academic advisors are often really clear on knowing where those boundaries are and referring to specialized areas like mental health counseling, financial aid, tutoring, things like that. We hope that having this definition and scope of practice will help others better recognize when they're crossing into our boundary of doing academic advising responsibilities. All right, so why are we ready for this definition now? We're ready now because of all of the work that has happened in the field since NACADA's founding in the 1970s. All of that work has set a foundation that leads us to here. So there's three things I'd like to call out as being important in that story. So one, there were some strategic priorities set by the association. Two, there's a lot of scholarship that has been published by the association's members. And then three, there are some factors in higher education and society at large that all play a role in this. So let's start with NACADA, and things that NACADA itself did. I'm going to call out a couple of things here. In 2003, the NACADA board charged a task force to articulate a definition of advising. That's one my old mentor, Linda Higginson, was on. That task force's work ultimately led to the 2006 concept of academic advising, which articulated that advising is integral to the teaching and learning mission of higher education, and that, like teaching, it has a curriculum, a pedagogy, and student learning outcomes, right? That was foundationally important for the field. In 2007, the NACADA board charged a task force to identify ways to infuse research throughout advising, right? And that task force set in motion a number of things that were done by the research committee and then eventually by the executive office itself and the Center for Research. Both of those efforts have led to lasting change in the association and the field, including the articulation of academic advising core competencies model that was published in 2017, and a very significant increase in the number and varieties of published scholarship on academic advising. So let's turn to that published scholarship. In our published scholarship, there is a significant thread that grapples with the identity and role of academic advising in higher education. And that type of introspection had became a lot more visible in the early 2000s. That's one of the factors that led Marie Lindhurst and I to write our paper, Advising is Advising, which Feel Good Friday, I feel like this is a culmination of what we started back then in 2008. Anyway, we weren't the only ones grappling with these topics. Padak and Kuhn's editorship of the NACADA Journal led to the publication of a lot of these things. Lowenstein's work, Peter Hagen's work in publishing monographs on the scholarship of academic advising, contributions by Champlin Scharf, Himes, Eric White, Sharon Aiken-Wisniewski, and Smith Troxel, Lee Schaefer, and Craig McGill, and many, many others contributed very significant in very significant ways to the scholarly debate in the 2010s and into the 20-teens, and then expanding on the kind of scholarship that's present in the field today. So we see that in some of the more unique works that are being done by Puraway, Venable, and Moore McGill, in those works that examine the purpose and identity of academic advising. That has all moved us into a very different place than we were in 2002. We now have multiple textbooks focused on academic advising. We have graduate programs with academic advising as a degree focus. We're different than we were 20 years ago. And third, a number of things have changed in higher education and society that both make this more possible and more necessary. So, of significance, there are many more people whose jobs have a central focus on academic advising than there were 20 years ago. And that speaks to the special role academic advising plays in higher education, to the distinctive skill set that it requires. Also of significance is the persistent lack of a common understanding of what advising is among those who are making decisions about priorities at an institution, which can lead to some of the things I articulated in the first slide: ambiguity among roles, right? Ambiguity among the role of a success coach and the role of an academic advisor, for example, and scope creep into academic advising, where advisors are being expected to fill roles beyond academic advising, like providing some basic needs or mental health interventions, right? So the task force's charge was to develop a definition and scope for academic advising that is based on the current and projected future status of the field and built on the foundation from the literature and scholarship of academic advising. So the task force received their charge from NACADA in October 2024. We immediately went to the annual conference that happened hot on those heels, where we really spent some time deliberately listening for relevant readiness, needs, concerns, existing definitions or scope assertions. And then from there, the task force members met every other week following the conference, and started to just debrief those conference takeaways, dig in on learning what was in the literature, and on reviewing other fields who are similar to ours. So we reviewed prior output of similar NACADA task forces. We looked at the published scholarship about the definition and purposes of academic advising, did a landscape of an analysis of how related organizations talk about academic advising and the purposes of advising, and looking at other fields where there is a strong practitioner focus, like in nursing, social work, student affairs, things like that. We consulted with some advising scholars, many of whom were named in my name drop earlier. And then we had several listening sessions among members, conducted a member survey, and received some board input. All of that led to some revisions. We also factored in some consideration for foreseeable trends in higher education, like the rise of artificial intelligence, mental health needs, and things like that. So we set some guiding priorities from that initial review that have led us through to the conclusion of our work. It was important. One of the things we noticed in looking at what has been said about academic advising prior to this is most of those statements say what advising does rather than what advising is. So a lot of it went to like how we do our work or what the outcome of the work is, but didn't define what advising is in and of itself. So it was important for us to be doing that. It was also important for us to differentiate what advisors are responsible for from what competencies, right? What advisors need to know in order to meet those responsibilities. We sought to articulate the distinctive responsibilities of academic advising that are different from other kinds of student support roles. There's a lot of overlap in the things that we do with the things that other people who are also supporting students do. But what is different about academic advising? What's at its core? We sought to emphasize the centrality of relationship building and meaning making for individual students. We think this is from everything we've looked at in the literature and everything we heard from our member feedback, these are the things that are most important to us as a field, right? That we seek to make relationships that are individually meaningful to students, right? And hope that students take some meaning out of their educations. And in that same vein, we wanted to emphasize that it's the human in this relationship that matters the most, that human interpretation and sense making that we're doing in conveying information. We're not just relaying information like a robot, right? We're interpreting and helping a student make sense of that information with respect to their own individual position and needs. So we sought to emphasize that. And then we also wanted to create the possibility for NACADA to then extend that into creating some specific recommendations about caseloads, codes of ethics, advisor qualifications, or anything like that if they desire to do so. From those listening sessions and member surveys, we learned a couple of things that I think are important for you to know. Number one, there was overwhelmingly strong support for two things: for having a definition at all and for claiming academic advising as a profession. Second, we made some revisions from earlier drafts to address concern about a couple of things that maybe that we think are really important and that we heard are important from the field. So to make that human-centered work explicit, to emphasize that there's some co-responsibility between the advisor and the institution themselves, to strengthen the claim of distinctive knowledge, not just about direct service to students and about relationship building to students, but what we learn about the institution itself, what we know about curricula, policy, procedure, the social effects of decisions, right? We heard that there's a strong desire to ensure that the future-oriented purpose of teaching students any of the ways of thinking about their education is evident, and that to ensure that advisor is an inclusive term, right? So regardless of what kind of other roles you have at the university, right, that the role of advisor is included in this definition. There were a couple of things we heard that we didn't include in this initial offering to the board. There's some, among the association and the members who provided feedback, some desire for some additional statements about the normative expectations of advising, like what advising is not, for example, or what are some of the expectations we would have for students as they engage with advising. There's also a strong desire for some help on guidance on caseloads, on ethics, and so a desire for some supports that would be consistent with the kind of support that developed professions offer for those who are practicing within the profession. Okay, so that's some background of how we got to where we are. Here is the definition of academic advising as accepted by the board. Academic advising is a field of study and profession that focuses on the intellectual, personal, and educational development of advisees as they engage with higher education. So we are claiming a field of study and profession centered on intellectual, personal, and educational development of people who are engaging with higher education. These next two statements elaborate on the field of study and profession statement. So the research-informed practice of academic advising is founded on interpersonal relationships that support, understand, and empower individual advisees to navigate their academic journeys and to make personally, socially, and culturally relevant meaning of their learning experiences. And then this is what the distinctive knowledge statement. Academic advising creates unique expertise in how curricula, policies, and institutional cultures shape and are shaped by learner goals and experiences. All right, so a couple of things that I want to point out to you here is on the word profession. If you look in our advising literature, you'll find that there is both support for and against a claim of being a profession, right? So depending on the kind of definition one applies, we may or may not meet that definition. Nevertheless, it is consensus among our task force that that is what we aspire to be, and overwhelmingly what we heard from member feedback. So the inclusion of that word is deliberate. In this definition, it allows NACADA to take a lead in moving toward professionalization, and it allows NACADA to claim the profession. All right, move on. Part of our charge was also to define a scope of practice for academic advising, and this is how we framed it, right? So we believe that there are a set of responsibilities that fall under academic advising. This is what makes it distinct from other kinds of student support roles at a university. An important note here is the statement acknowledging who is an academic advisor. So any individual at an institution might have multiple roles, right? So think about yourself. You probably have more than one job at your university, right? I run a student success software. I supervise other people. I have a roster of advisees, okay? Because I have a roster of advisees, I am an academic advisor, and these responsibilities apply to me, okay? So regardless of what other role one has, if they're given the responsibility of academic advising, they share these responsibilities. Okay, so it's not about an approach that one uses. It's not about the type of appointment one has at the university. It's about the responsibility to these students who are our advisees. Okay, so in this, right up front, we are here to help students navigate their education, right? So we're guiding them on curricula, learning outcomes, policies, procedures, and interpreting those in ways that are meaningful to them as individuals. We are partners to advisees, so this set of responsibilities here emphasizes that relationship work of advising, that we're here to partner with students, help them in their goal setting, decision making, problem solving, critical thinking, and planning, and it may address any one of these other sub bullets for any of these students. Another set of statements really emphasizes the role of advisors in connecting with others who support different aspects of the student experience, right? Our role as referrers, as navigators, like helping students navigate our institutions, is central to academic advising. And this set of responsibilities articulates some of the details of that. And these last statements suggest, right, very strongly that academic advisors are responsible for ongoing learning, right? Lifelong learning, and contributing that learning to the greater good, be it on the micro or macro level, right? So this last bullet point, creating and disseminating new knowledge about advising, right? Some people might read that as I should be publishing. Sure. Yep. That would be great, right? More of us, more voices will lead to a better understanding of what we're doing and why. But it might also mean that you debrief with the person next door, right? And learn from each other on that micro level. It might mean that you help to influence your institution where you can about things that your distinctive knowledge has let you know, right? So this can take multiple forms, not just what we think of in academic scholarship. But so these are the responsibilities of academic advisors. They are not light, and in many ways, they are not meetable. And that is because academic advisors are not the only ones responsible. Let me say that again to the back of the room. Academic advisors are not the only ones responsible for helping them to meet these responsibilities. Okay. One of the things that we heard very loud at that 2024 advising conference was deep hurt and frustration at advisors wanting to do these things, but not being able to because they weren't properly supported by their institution to do it. So we believe it's the institution's responsibility to create conditions that enable advisors to meet these responsibilities. So what I also want to say to the back of the room is individual advisors should not feel less worthy for working in conditions that don't permit them to reach these goals. Okay. So this scope of practice is meant to set some boundaries that can help protect you against some of that scope creep, those catch-all asks of advisors that are made in advising units. But we also included in this set of statements some statements about what higher education institutions are responsible for, right? So we have a shared responsibility to meet this, us as advisors and us as institutions. So it's institutions' responsibility to recognize academic advising as an essential component of the educational process, fundamentally important. It's the responsibility of institutions to create an advising structure that's informed by research and scholarship about academic advising. In many ways, sometimes the structure of advising is there because of history and convenience, not because it was built on something that was intentionally developed. Where there are multiple units delivering academic advising, it's the institution's responsibility to ensure that all of that advising is conducted with similar policies, technologies, staffing, and compensation, and that students have a consistent experience across those units. It's an institutional responsibility to empower students to be active participants in those academic advising relationships. Maybe it's by creating structures, by setting up advising policy, or by enabling opportunity for individualized connection. It's also an institution's responsibility to create conditions under which academic advisors can meet those responsibilities by setting appropriate staffing levels, caseloads, work locations, technologies, professional development, training, and assessment infrastructure, access to accurate and transparent information, right? How many of you know that there's only information in a file drawer somewhere that that's critically important for a student to know to make timely progress, right? And timely data about student progress and outcomes. It's also an institution's responsibility to ensure that one-to-one interactions between academic advisors and advisees are the standard practice, and that when group activities or artificial intelligence resources are being used, they're not superseding or replacing that human relationship. Okay. It's the institution's responsibility to ensure that all academic advising interactions and record-keeping practices respect advisee privacy. It's the institution's responsibility to ensure that supporting collaboration between academic advising and other offices who are responsible for supporting student learning, well-being, persistence, and educational outcomes is happening. For ensuring that academic advising does not become a catch-all for specialized student needs, especially mental health care. That came out very strongly in our member feedback, that was a thing that was being asked of many advisors in many places. All right, these are the last set. Higher education institutions are responsible for supporting ongoing education and professional development for academic advising. And this is key for supporting all people who have academic advising responsibilities, both faculty and staff, in meeting those responsibilities through sustainable workloads, professional development, scholarly engagement. This is very important to me: academic freedom protection, knowledge dissemination, and professional reward for conducting the responsibilities of advising. So in the context that I work in, We have mixed models. We have every model of academic advising possible at my institution. And in the places where people are not meeting those responsibilities, it's because they're not been set up to do that, right? They've been set up to not be able to because the expectations that are put on them are just not realistic. And how many of us as staff members have academic freedom protection, even though we're working in knowledge creation, sometimes DEI work, right? So we're in a vulnerable position, many of us. Okay, last two. It is important for institutions to create pathways for advancement within academic advising that reward depth of expertise and experience. I'm going to say that again, that rewards depth of expertise and experience. Not that one is taking on more responsibilities or, starting to do different things other than advising. That expertise in advising should be rewarded in a similar way as depth of expertise in a disciplinary field is recognized. All right. And finally, higher education institutions are responsible for actively seeking and applying the expertise developed through academic advising to their governance and decision-making about curricula, processes, policies, and organizational structures. Academic advisors know things that could make our institutions better places, and it's the institution's responsibility to seek and use that information. Okay, so with that, I'd like to open it up for some conversation. And Kyle's going to join this where needed. My two questions to you are, what does your institution need to do to meet their responsibilities to you? And what support could our professional organization offer? So with this, I think we could probably use the raise hand function. I'm probably not going to be able to keep up with chat if that's the way we're doing it. Won't we open up? Leslie.
Yes, thank you, Janet. I feel that my institution could offer more professional support since I work in one of the smaller academic advising offices in student success and persistence. We have 3 advisors right now because we are short staffed, and I feel that I'm meeting my responsibilities as an academic advisor, but at the same time we're not getting enough attention from administration and leadership since it's all because we had a change in presidencies this year.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to do a lot of recruiting and trying to get the enrollment number stuff, but at the same time students are underperforming and not meeting their advisors, especially on the junior and senior side. And that's where a lot of the problems are, like with the personal responsibility that I preach in my philosophy. It's just and I think Kyle can attest to this. I feel that we need more professional training from not only the student success advisors, but the faculty academic advisors as well.
Yes. One of the things when faculty are asked to advise, some of them come to it because some of them are very excited to do it, right? It's an individual decision to love it or not love it. And I think that's part of what we need to recognize, that when you come to advising because you applied for that as your job, you're coming to it for a different reason. So how could we help our faculty colleagues better understand what this role is, and how could not you, Leslie, but we writ large, I guess, institutions writ large, help them be better able to meet that responsibility, right? I think one of the hesitations is for people is that they don't feel comfortable doing it. They don't want to do a bad job, so they just don't, right? Because they're not enabled to do it, not rewarded to do it. So I think that's one of the barriers there. I'm not sure if I'm getting towards your answer or not. I think yes, training is important. but also so is showing why it matters. And I think this is a place where we could all lean in, and maybe do some different publicity campaigns about what difference does this human to human connection mean for our students. Yeah. I'm seeing some things in the chat that might be relevant to this.
Yeah,
Veronica, do you want
Janet,
to
I'll
chime
throw this
in?
one out there to you
Okay.
from Doris Frazier, who asked, what is the difference between an academic advisor and a success coach? And I know that you all wrestled with these different roles and
Mhm.
how to be inclusive of those who provide academic advising in some
Mhm.
way, shape, or form. So I'll answer a little bit of your task force was really thoughtful and intentional about anyone who provides academic advisement in any way, shape, or form to a student needs to align with this definition and scope of practice. But do you want to go a little bit more into the dialogue you all had as a task force around that?
Yeah. At some institutions, I think success coach is the term being used for those who have advising responsibilities, right? So sometimes it's interchangeable as a term. In other places, it's a success coach is someone who does the auxiliary support, right? So helping a student make sure they've got their basic needs met, are able to navigate financial aid. At some other institutions, success coaches are helping students work on very specific goals that they have, right? Like self-efficacy goals, for example. And so there are times when an advisor might do success coaching things, right? Um, and sometimes, depending on how the institution has defined it, they're the same thing. And I think that's part of the problem is that it could mean multiple things. And that lack of clarity means we can't even articulate to a student what they should expect, right? So anyway, that's where we got to. It's like if this is what you're doing and the name is success coach, then these are the responsibilities are of academic advising, right?
Great.
Regardless of what the role name it is. But if this is what you're doing, then you're an advisor.
Right, absolutely. And I think
Right.
that that is an important clarification point for institutions who will ask that question, and for sure.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
Veronica, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead and ask a question or share your thought?
I'm wondering what thought or plan there is for sharing this with the audiences that really need to hear it. I think that those of us that are here are probably already close to advising, and a lot of what we're hearing today is really exciting to hear, like to see in writing. And hopefully, I don't know if you're unveiling it on a website or anything like that soon so that that can be shared with a lot of folks. But I wonder about the plan to take this to where it really needs to go. So, what associations, what groups in terms of higher education presidents, faculty, what are those other associations where this can be presented and shared and actually maybe create some kind of partnership with those folks at the high leadership level to really take this seriously and to acknowledge and recognize the work that has to happen to get to this place?
Yeah, I can jump in and respond to that one. And then I should probably introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Ross. I'm the Executive Director of NACADA. I'm really thankful for you all being here and for celebrating Global Advising Week with us. So what I'll share here is that we do have a webpage built. We'll be sending out an all-member announcement early next week, sharing the official announcement of the definition of and scope of practice for academic advising. So there will be a webpage that we would recommend any and all members sharing widely at their institutions, getting to their respective offices and administrators. There is some of that work we can do, but really the most important component is that our members are sharing it at their institutions. That is going to be the best way to get it in front of as many folks as possible. But we'll certainly also be doing a kind of a quote unquote roadshow with this, where presenting the information at various conferences. I introduced it softly at the National Resource Center for the First Year Experience in Students in Transition first year conference, and showed them the draft definition at the time, and it was received really positively. People were just grateful to have an answer to the question, because our office gets a lot of calls about, hey, does NACADA have an official definition? And for a while it was, see the concept for academic advising, stay tuned, and now we have that answer. So definitely getting it out in the universe as much as possible. So our members will have access to it. The public will have access to the webpage as well. Definitely would love for you all to share it with your administrators, which also responds to a question here of how do we help our institutions align with their responsibilities outlined is have those conversations at your institution and share. There was a really cool testimonial from another person that saw the draft definition and scope when we were rolling it out at region conferences to solicit feedback from attendees. She saw that the explicit bullet on higher education institutions are responsible for ensuring that there are spaces that respect advisee privacy. So she took that to her supervisor and said, see, NACADA even says we need to have spaces to respect advisee privacy. And 2 months later, they were all moved into dedicated office spaces for themselves and for their students. And so as part of that is you having now the opportunity to advocate as well for what you need, and would really encourage that.
Megan?
Hi, thank y'all. This has been great to see brought together in writing and shared out. Answering the question of sort of where the institution could do more to support advising, as we've talked about scope creep and the idea of everything sort of could fall into advising because of how interconnected we are. One of the challenges we find is 10 years ago, there was downtime in advising. There were peaks and valleys in the workload, and that doesn't exist the same way anymore with that scope creep. And so finding the time and the space in prioritization at the institution to devote to team building, to that professional development, to the training, to the sort of reset and like mental wellness that you need to be able to ramp back up for the next big peak season. Is something that's hard to balance with the need from the institutional perspective to be constantly available and constantly on for the student who might need you in that time. So one of the things that I haven't gotten to read through everything in specific detail, but one of the things I'm looking to help identify at our institution is that that part of the profession that's about working across a team of advisors, and that it takes time to develop that. And if we never have time that we can all be together, then there's never time to develop that team. So that's part of what I'm looking for in this, and I will keep reading through everything, but that's what we're struggling with.
Well said.
There are some questions and comments around caseload and case management in here. So wanted to respond to this definition of and scope of practice for academic advising is also a catalyst for a lot of other important work coming down the road. So the task force submitted in their report to the board of directors some next things that need to be in place are code of ethics for academic advisors, what ethical guidelines they need to be following, as well as statements more solid on things like caseloads, resourcing, compensation, career laddering. So one of the next steps that we will be engaging in is a job task analysis for the profession. What that does is it does a deeper dive into what are the tasks academic advisors are doing every day, or a little less frequently than that. So gauging what are the regular tasks, to what degree of frequency are those tasks engaged in, what is the level of complexity of each task, what are the required knowledge, skills, and abilities to execute on those tasks. And then from there, that helps inform things like, well, what would appropriate compensation for people with those assigned roles be? What would be an effective caseload to be able to actually complete all of those tasks and responsibilities appropriately? And then within our NACADA Center for Research, there will be a research report coming out, I'm going to guess in the next 6 months. So not a firm commitment to that, but we're still drafting up the report. That will have an early announcement of here's where we currently stand on our thoughts on appropriate caseloads for academic advising based on current literature and a small respondent pool. And then we'll build off of that from there as well.
I also think on caseloads, from my observation, there's diminishing returns when they get too little. When those caseloads are too small, then it gets harder to practice, like exponentially harder to practice well, because you don't have the regular encountering of the kinds of policies, procedures, curricula, student challenges, resources they need. So to learn how to advise 15 students is just as hard to learn how to advise 150. That there's kind of no difference in the baseline skill set that one needs to do that. So I think that's part of what I would advocate that the association consider in assigning caseloads. As mine has gotten smaller, as my other responsibilities have increased, it's harder for me to still be a good advisor. And so I feel for anyone who's thrown into this work without having the years of experience at a higher caseload, not a too high caseload, but a higher caseload that I was able to build on. I think a lot of the questions in the chat too are about advocacy. So I think there's some role that the association can play for us that hopefully can come from this, like giving the association a place to stand on. Then let's them preach to higher education leaders in a different kind of way. But I also think this is a skill set that advisors could spend some time developing. So we have lots of professional development about the student work that we do, like how to interact with students, right? Relationship building. But could we start to build out some help for each other in learning how to be better advocates and influencers within our institutions? So I'll put that out there as another line of thinking that maybe we want to invest some time in.
Anyone want to jump on and unmute and share any questions or thoughts we can respond to while we catch up on the chat?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a question, Kyle, and I put this in the chat. Yeah, it's not a question, more of a comment. And I think about this about the advisor salaries because it depends on the institution, the size of the institution, if it's an R1 or an R2 institution, the number of employees, the student enrollment, the salary, and most importantly, cost of living. Like some of us are trying to move up advising wise. Some of us have been at the same institution for a few years and want to small institutions and want to move up and want to expand professionally or educationally, but at the same time, it's competitive. And how do we navigate that as external candidates who might have the role of outsider imposter syndrome to those who are insiders in dealing with the institutional politics?
Really great point. And I think that it's always a competitive field when there's internal candidates, right? Because they have institutional knowledge that is very difficult to train up or bring someone up to speed as quickly. Certainly was a product of that in prior interviews in my career before, where people have told me we went with an internal candidate. And I understood and respected that because their system was quite complicated, and having someone who would be able to just hit the ground running with that institutional knowledge is tremendously helpful. But that said, you can't always assume that they're going to prefer an internal candidate. Sometimes having a fresh perspective, an outsider's knowledge, is more beneficial and helpful to that institution at that time. But what I would say around compensation is, yes, we are seeing that we need to do more around advocacy for compensation for academic advising, because we all know that salaries have not increased in comparison to cost of living, and certainly are not always keeping up with the cost of living, particularly in more expensive areas. So that's part of what the job task analysis as a natural next step will also help inform, is some more work around caseloads, benchmarking compensation structures, and other things. The other thing we're going to be working on within the NACADA Center for Research, thanks to Dr. Wendy Troxell's leadership, is a common data set for academic advising, a place and space for institutions to put their data into and give us, that way we can provide regular benchmarking reports on this is what the landscape of academic advising looks like for large public research one universities as far as caseloads go. Who's conducting academic advising? Where is it? Is it centralized, decentralized? what does current compensation look like? And then that will help provide benchmarking reports for institutions to compare each other to. And then we can also look at that data and say, what would aspirational recommendations look like? Stacy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I think this kind of goes along with the idea of compensation, and I think somebody may have said it in the chat, but I would love to get guidance on maybe how different institutions, whether you're 2-year, 4-year, whatnot, how you might advocate for and set up different career ladders. So there's an opportunity for advancement. What might benchmarks be if it's not just all about time, or you can't have triple the staff of what you have now, right? To say, I have an advisor level 1, 2, and 3, but how could we start to advocate for that, I guess? Yeah.
I think the important component there is it calls out the higher ed institutions become responsible for recognizing and rewarding depth of knowledge of academic advising. So, Janet, can you talk a little bit more about that, where that came from in the overall definition and scope of practice, and
Yeah.
what y'all's task force was envisioning around that?
Yeah, it came from our own personal experiences in some ways, right? So at my institution, you advance in an academic advisor level if there's money in your particular unit for it, and if you meet HR's definition of having acquired additional responsibilities. And that's it. So I would need to do work that's not advising in order to advance in advising. And so finding ways to influence our institutions to reward our depth of expertise, like a better advisor, a more experienced advisor has higher value to the institution, and that ought to be recognized. Just as a faculty member who has higher depth of expertise is also more valued at they're given recognition for that depth of expertise. So that was our intent, is to align our expertise in that kind of way.
We have a question from Ryan Shekel on, apologies if this is already addressed, but could you all comment on the alignment with the CAS standards for academic advising programs and this new definition scope, if any? So we have not reached out to CAS and said, you must change your standards right now, immediately. So that's part of next steps in creating and shaping out and refining standards for the profession over time. But I would imagine that we would certainly hope that the CAS standards reflect our definition and scope of practice in that case. But one of our next steps in the process down the road.
Monica put a comment in that I would like to dive into and maybe talk about a little bit together. Oh, unless Tiffany wants to go first. No, Tiffany, take on your. But the issue that administrations can just pick and choose what they want to do, and that will never be different. It will never be different. So an institution doesn't really need to hold themselves accountable. But one of the things that we can do, hopefully, by working together in a more clear way, maybe we can work together to show why this matters to the institution, and why, if an institution is not doing these things, it's ultimately detrimental to the institution, right? So some of that financial return on investment for the work that we do with students, some of the down the line work that we could be doing as students walk away from an education, understanding why it was valuable and being a better alumni, right? There are some tangible things that could come back to reward an institution for investing in our work. I think one of the things that we could be doing next is making that a lot more clear. And I don't just mean in retention and graduation rates. Those are important, but not the only things that I think we should be measuring and advertising as what difference we make to institutions. Oh, and Anna, that's an interesting point.
saw some conversation around like the irony of institutions cutting down the amount of academic advisors or decreasing capacity at that point. And time again, I've been reading press releases and stories from institutions over the past couple of years that have doubled down on their investment in academic advising and seeing the return of investment. So if institutions have increased the number of advisors, decreased caseloads to below 300 to 1, they're seeing spikes in first-year retention, increases in 4- and 6-year graduation rates, persistence beyond the second year, and overall retention of academic advisors seeing decreased burnout. So the on investment is there. So part of that is also being able to share those successes out in the universe. So I know like Texas Tech University was one I read a press release about recently. University of Iowa's College of Liberal Arts and Sciences had also talked about increasing advisor capacity and demonstrating that return on investment. So the more you can also share that, hopefully we can correct the narrative of we need to cut budgets. I'm like, but this is where you're going to actually see return on monetary investment is through retaining more students with more access to academic advisors.
Yeah. Tiffany, there's still time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask if when we're having the discussion and consideration about caseload sizes, can you also talk about leadership and advising? We really struggle with, for some reason, leadership positions are kind of held to the same caseload while also trying to support all the advisors that they manage, which obviously is not great practice.
Yeah.
Doing all of the things for everyone all at
Yeah.
once clearly does
Yeah.
not work, right? So yes, we can absolutely make sure we take note of that as we explore more caseload conversations and how that impacts workload for advising
Yeah.
administrators.
And I think the words we chose in that scope of practice statement, maybe it doesn't. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sorry if I'm misremembering, but the caseload should respect the other responsibilities that that person has to the institution. So, right? So as a leader who's also supervising people, right? Then that is time that needs to be made realistically possible that's a responsibility that needs to be made realistically possible. And then against what other responsibilities the person has, maybe a caseload of students as advisor, maybe teaching a class as an instructor, right? All of those things need to be considered. I know they're not always, but we should be pushing that they are.
All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up at this point. With this being the last event that we're hosting for Global Advising Week, I want to say happy Global Advising Week to all members of NACADA at this time. Thank you all for joining, and thanks to our executive office staff who've planned a wonderful event this week, particularly under Dr. Zarana Jones's leadership in our office. Thanks to all of our presenters for giving their time, effort, and energy. And especially Janet Schulenberg on a Friday to present the information this week for Global Advising Week. The profession matters. There's clear alignment with return on investment and student success in higher education. Your work does deeply matter. And I'm personally really excited to see that we are at this point where we have an official definition of and scope of practice for academic advising to better advocate for the profession overall. So thanks to Janet Schulenberg and the entire task force's leadership of getting us to this point. I know that was definitely a labor of love. And I see Zarana with your hand up. Please take it away.
Last final comments from me. Thank you all. It's been a fantastic week. If you are one of our many, many, many winners over the last couple of weeks leading up to Global Advising Week, please post your items. We love to see what you have received. So please share so we can celebrate you, highlight you. Thank you all.
With that, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Hopefully you find some time to rest and recharge.